MacDill Field, Florida. Summer, 1942. A twin-engine bomber lines up on the runway, engines howling at full power. The pilot is 22 years old. He has 230 flying hours to his name. The aircraft he's about to fly approaches the runway at 130 miles per hour, loses all directional control if an engine quits below 163, and has already killed more American airmen than the Luftwaffe has this month. The men at MacDill have a saying, "One a day in Tampa Bay." They are not joking. The Martin B-26 Marauder was the most feared bomber in the United States Army Air Forces, not feared by the Germans, feared by the men who had to fly it. Pilots called it the Widowmaker, the Flying Prostitute, the Martin Murderer. Congress investigated it. Generals wanted it cancelled. 4 separate boards met to decide whether to scrap the entire program, and then something changed. By the end of the war, this same aircraft had flown over 129,000 sorties. In Europe alone, dropped 169,000 tons of bombs, and according to 9th Air Force records, achieved the lowest combat loss rate of any American bomber in the European theatre. This is the story of how the most dangerous aircraft in America became the most accurate bomber over Normandy. The B-26 exists because of a specification issued on March 11th, 1939. The United States Army Air Corps wanted a twin-engine medium bomber capable of more than 300 miles per hour, carrying 3,000 pounds of bombs over a range of 2,000 miles. The Glenn L. Martin Company of Middle River, Maryland, assigned a 26-year-old engineer named Peyton Magruder to lead the design. Magruder made a decision that would define the aircraft and nearly destroy it. The specification demanded speed. It said nothing about landing speed, so Magruder optimized entirely for velocity. He designed a torpedo-shaped fuselage with a circular cross-section, mounted a shoulder wing spanning just 65 feet, and fitted 2 Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines, producing 1,850 horsepower each. The wing loading reached 53 pounds per square foot, the highest of any Allied bomber in the war. Martin submitted the design and scored 813 points in the Air Corps evaluation. The competing North American design, which became the B-25 Mitchell, scored 673. In September 1939, the Air Corps ordered 201 B-26s straight into production. No prototype, no flight testing. By the time company test pilot William Ebel flew the first example on November 25, 1940, orders had grown to over 1,100 aircraft. The Marauder met its speed promise. Test data confirmed 326 miles per hour at 14,250 feet. It was the fastest medium bomber in the American infantry. But speed had come at a cost that Magruder's equations could not predict. The cost was measured in lives. When the first B-26s reached operational units in February 1941, experienced pilots immediately noticed the approach speed, 130 to 150 miles per hour, far higher than any comparable aircraft. The B-25 landed at roughly 100. Lose an engine on takeoff in the Marauder with a full bomb load, and the aircraft would roll inverted before the pilot could react. The official minimum control speed on a single engine was 163 miles per hour. Below that, the pilot's manual warned, the aircraft would go over on its back in a flash. Young pilots straight from flying school, some with barely 200 hours total, were being assigned to an aircraft that punished the smallest error with death. At MacDill Field, the primary B-26 training base, the results were catastrophic. In one 30-day period, the 386th Bomb Group alone crashed 15 Marauders. Across the second half of 1942, according to records compiled by the University of South Florida, 34 accidents killed 56 people at MacDill despite near-perfect Florida weather. 13 aircraft specifically ditched in Tampa Bay between August 1942 and October 1943. The phrase "one a day in Tampa Bay" overstated the literal rate, which averaged roughly 1 bay ditching per month, but the emotional truth behind it was undeniable. Weight had crept from the designed 26,625 pounds to over 31,500 with no increase in power. Fuel problems damaged carburetor diaphragms and caused engine failures on takeoff. Propeller pitch control malfunctions meant a missed pre-flight check could send the aircraft straight into the water. Civilian ferry pilots refused to fly the Marauder and resigned. Every pilot in the 320th Bomb Group except the commanding officer and his executive requested transfer to another aircraft type. The nicknames piled up: Widowmaker, Flying Coffin, B-Crash, Baltimore Whore, the Wingless Wonder. The crisis reached Congress. The Truman Committee, the Senate Special Committee investigating the National Defense Program, recommended stopping B-26 production in July 1942 And again in October, General Hap Arnold convened a board under Major General Carl Spaatz to determine the aircraft's fate. 4 separate investigation boards met. Glenn L. Martin himself was called before the Truman Committee. When Senator Truman asked why so many Marauders crashed, Martin reportedly answered that the wings were too short. 2 men saved the B-26. The first was Brigadier General James Doolittle. Fresh from the Tokyo raid and carrying the Medal of Honor, Arnold ordered Doolittle to investigate the Marauder problem personally. Doolittle visited training bases and asked student pilots what they believed about the aircraft. Every answer was the same. It could not fly on one engine. You could not turn into a dead engine. Landing single engine was impossible. Doolittle's response, as he later described in his autobiography, was to line up on the runway, feather one engine during the takeoff roll, make a steep climbing turn into the dead engine, fly the pattern, and land, all without a co-pilot. He repeated the demonstration with the other engine feathered. The second man was Captain Vincent Burnett, a former airshow pilot from Lynchburg, Virginia. Burnett had been quietly experimenting with single-engine B-26 operations as a ferry pilot. Doolittle put him on staff, and Burnett's demonstrations were even more dramatic. He threw a combat-loaded Marauder around the control tower on one engine, performed a single-engine aileron roll, and landed before stunned trainees. Many later attributed these demonstrations to Doolittle, but it was often Burnett at the controls. The effect was immediate. B-26 accident rates dropped to levels comparable with other combat types within weeks. The demonstrations did not fix the mechanical problems, but they broke the cycle of fear that was killing as many pilots as the engineering faults. At the same time, Martin engineers implemented the wing modification. Beginning with the B-26B-10 variant in early 1943, wingspan grew from 65 to 71 feet. Wing area increased from 602 to 658 square feet. A taller vertical stabilizer, slotted flaps, a lengthened nose-wheel strut, and uprated R2800-43 engines, producing 2,000 horsepower each, completed the package. The 1943 accident rate dropped 60% from the previous year. Now, before we get into how this aircraft performed in combat, if you are enjoying this deep dive into one of the most controversial bombers of the war, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Right, let us get into the combat record. The Marauder's first combat came in the Pacific, where the 22nd Bombardment Group flew from Townsville, Australia, against Rabaul on April 5, 1942. The aircraft's most dramatic Pacific moment came at the Battle of Midway on June 4, when 4 hastily torpedo-equipped B-26s attacked the Japanese carrier fleet. 2 were shot down before launching. The surviving aircraft, flown by Captain James Collins and Lieutenant James Murray, released torpedoes at 200 feet altitude and 800 yards range. Both missed. Murray's aircraft flew straight down the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, strafing the deck and killing 2 seamen. Both surviving Marauders crash-landed on Midway, riddled beyond repair. Collins received the Distinguished Service Cross, but the Pacific was not the Marauders' war. Lieutenant General George Kenney chose the B-25 Mitchell for the theatre, favouring its shorter takeoff run, simpler maintenance, and better suitability for the low-level tactics his command preferred. The last Pacific B-26 mission flew on January 9, 1944. Europe was where the Marauder would either prove itself or confirm every accusation against it. The proof began with disaster. The 322nd Bomb Group flew its first European mission on May 14, 1943, 12 Marauders at treetop level against a power station at IJmuiden in the Netherlands. All returned, but every aircraft was damaged and no bombs hit the target. 3 days later, 11 B-26s went back. 1 aborted with electrical failure. It was the only aircraft that survived. The remaining 10 were all destroyed, shot down by 20mm flak crossing the coast, lost in a mid-air collision, blown apart over the target, the last 2 caught by Bf-109s over the North Sea. Colonel Robert Stillman, the group commander, was captured and later became the first commandant of the United States Air Force Academy. It was one of the worst single-mission loss rates in American Air Force history. The response transformed the aircraft's entire operational doctrine. B-26 units stood down for 2 months, retraining for medium-altitude bombing at 10 to 15,000 feet using Norden bomb sites with fighter escort. The first medium-altitude mission came on July 16th, 1943. 18 B-26s attacked rail yards at B-26s attacked rail yards at Abbeville. All 18 returned safely. By August, the 8th Air Force calculated that a B-26 crew could expect to survive 37 missions versus just 17 for a B-17 crew. The Marauder had gone from the most dangerous bomber in America to the safest bomber over Europe in a matter of months. 8 B-26 groups eventually served in the 9th Air Force, and their target list was devastating. V-1 launch sites under Operation Crossbow, rail marshalling yards across northern France, German airfields within 130 miles of Caen rendered unusable before the invasion, Seine river bridges cut to isolate the Normandy battlefield. The Marauder groups became specialists in precision bridge destruction, earning the nickname Bridge Busters. D-Day was the aircraft's finest hour. On June 6, 1944, approximately 400 B-26s were dispatched against German coastal defences, when low cloud forced the heavy bombers to bomb blind. Dropping their loads up to 3 miles inland and missing the beach defences entirely, the medium bombers were cleared to drop below the overcast. Between 6:05 and 6:25 in the morning, roughly 290 Marauders struck Utah beach defences in a 20-minute window just before the first landing craft hit shore. They dropped 4,414 bombs with what the Air Force termed commendable accuracy. According to accounts published by the Smithsonian, these were the only bombers to hit their marks on D-Day. The 4th Infantry Division lost just 12 men at Utah Beach, fewer than died in a practice landing exercise in Britain. On the same beaches where heavy bombers missed everything, the Marauder, the aircraft Congress had tried to cancel, delivered the only effective air bombardment of the entire invasion. The Marauder's toughness matched its accuracy. The aircraft Flak Bait, a B-26B of the 322nd Bomb Group, completed 207 combat missions, more than any other American aircraft in the entire war. According to the Smithsonian, it returned twice on a single engine, once with an engine on fire and twice with complete electrical failure. Another Marauder named Mild and Bitter became the first Allied bomber to complete 100 European missions on May 9th, 1944, flying all 100 on its original engines without a single crew member killed or wounded. Captain Darrell Lindsay of the 394th Bomb Group earned the only Medal of Honor awarded for a B-26 mission on August 9, 1944, when he held his burning aircraft steady over a bridge target at Lyle Adam until every crew member bailed out safely. He did not survive. In the war's final weeks, the Marauder even faced the Luftwaffe's best. Adolf Galland's elite jet unit JV-44 attacked B-26s of the 323rd Bomb Group with Me-262s on April 16, 1945. One jet, moving too fast to break away, physically collided with the Marauder's propeller. The starboard engine kept running, its propeller blades bent so uniformly that no vibration was transmitted. The pilot, Lieutenant James Hansen, flew home. Galland's own Me-262 was damaged by return fire from the Marauder formations. The most quoted Allied assessment came from Air Marshal Sir John Slessor, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, who described the experienced Marauder groups as probably the best day bomber units in the world. The Marauder's bloodiest single day came during the Battle of the Bulge on December 23, 1944, when clearing skies sent the 9th Air Force into action without adequate fighter escort. Approximately 41 B-26s were shot down, and 182 more suffered battle damage, but the Marauders wrecked bridges and transport links feeding the German offensive. By January 1945, losses had dropped to just 20 aircraft in nearly 4,000 sorties. The comparative numbers tell the redemption story. The B-25 Mitchell, born from the same 1939 specification, was cheaper, more forgiving, and nearly twice as many were built. It landed at 100 miles per hour instead of 130. RAF test pilots said it had no vices, yet the 9th Air Force rated the Marauder as more accurate, placing 19% of bombs within 200 feet of the aiming point, versus 17% for the Mitchell. The B-26's combat loss rate in the mature operational period of 1944 to 45 fell below half of 1% per sortie, according to 9th Air Force records. The full European war figures show approximately 0.7% across all 129,000 sorties. It is worth noting that the B-25's overall European rate of 0.6% was marginally lower, though from far fewer sorties, and medium bombers hitting tactical targets at 10 to 15,000 feet, with fighter escort faced fundamentally different threats than heavy bombers penetrating deep into Germany. The comparison has limits, but the transformation from a 5% loss rate in North Africa to less than 1% in France remains one of the most dramatic improvements in military aviation history. The RAF operated the Marauder with 2 squadrons. Number 14, Squadron received Marauder Mark 1s in August 1942 in the Middle East, uniquely using the aircraft as a torpedo bomber and successfully sinking several merchant ships. Number 39 Squadron flew Marauders from December 1944, conducting shipping strikes along the Balkan coast. The South African Air Force was a larger operator with 5 squadrons flying over the Aegean, Crete, Italy and the Balkans. The Free French Air Force became the biggest non-American user, with 7 bomber groups flying nearly 5,000 combat sorties. The Marauder's post-war fate was swift and brutal. The Douglas A-26 Invader replaced all medium bombers, and the B-26's demanding handling made it unsuitable for anything else. Approximately 500 Marauders in Europe were ferried to Landsberg, Germany, where demolition charges blew them apart for smelting. Nearly 1,000 more were scrapped at Walnut Ridge, Arkansas. A fire at Martin's Baltimore plant destroyed all engineering drawings, making restoration effectively impossible. Today, roughly 7 B-26 Marauders survive worldwide, compared to over 100 B-25s. Flak bait rests at the Smithsonian. Dynamite sits at the Utah Beach Landing Museum in Normandy, a fitting home for the bomber that made that beach's landing the least costly of D-Day. The Martin B-26 Marauder was never a bad aircraft. It was a brilliant aircraft delivered to an unprepared system. Peyton Magruder's design did exactly what the Air Corps specification demanded. 300 miles per hour, 3,000 pounds of bombs, 2,000 miles of range. The specification never mentioned landing speed, and Magruder never compromised on it. When the training caught up to the engineering, when pilots learned to fly the aircraft instead of fearing it, the Marauder delivered on every promise. The aircraft that terrified its own pilots became the aircraft that terrified Germany. From a day in Tampa Bay to the only effective bombing on D-Day, from congressional cancellation hearings to the lowest loss rate in the 9th Air Force. And flak bait, with its 207